Good evening. Rabbi Jacobson here. I welcome you all for another episode of Wednesday Night Live. I welcome you, those here local, as well as online audiences. Thank you for making it happen. That thank you was to God and also to some individuals, because without the technology that is people think is man-made is actually really tapping into divine and forces that are here from the beginning of time. The only thing is, we only recently have learned to tap into them, which is generally a good lesson in life as well, that there are many, many forces at work that we may not be aware of. And just because we're not aware of it doesn't mean it's there. It's not there. You know, light waves, sound waves, cellular technology, microwaves, the things that we today take for granted and benefit from have been part of existence from the beginning of time. And yet people were not aware of it, and not only weren't aware, they also obviously therefore didn't create any tools and methods to tap into these forces. So one has to humbly wonder how many other forces are at work that we're still not aware of. Especially on a human level, we all have what we experience, what we call the sensory world, that we experience with our five senses, what we see, what we hear, what we taste, touch and smell. But you don't have to be a rocket scientist today to know that those are really superficial and external outer surface level experiences. So though we are consumed and we're seduced and we're completely almost controlled by our senses, the fact is our senses only touch the surface, the tip of the iceberg of reality. When it comes to real matters of life, like finding love, or dealing with pain, or existential questions, or the things that are intangible, the senses don't help us much. You don't see love, and you can't hear love, and you can't taste, touch, and smell it. No question, of course, love can be expressed with the senses, but it's something that is supersensory. And the same thing is with our intelligence and with other human experiences. The things that matter most to us are actually supersensory, not sensory at all. But yet, and here's the great dichotomy and even dissonance, that we live in a world that is almost completely controlled by the senses. You walk down the street, we're constantly hyperstimulated, overstimulated by the different inundating messages that come our way, whether it's images, whether it's sounds, whether it's colors, the subliminal and sometimes not so subliminal forces that are constantly demanding something of us. And yet there's another part of us, that's another reality, that is, we'll call it the inner you, as opposed to the outer you, that is not necessarily nourished or stimulated by these outer extremities. And that part of our lives is often undernourished because we're so stimulated on one level. I mean, this is where people bemoan, for example, people say that today children or adults sit 5-6 hours a day watching television. Television is maybe the ultimate example of hyperstimulation of your senses, because it's visual, and the visual is a very compelling, as I said, seductive force. And in a way, people live their lives vicariously through soap operas. And I know people who cannot miss an episode. This is their life. And it replaces, in a way, the drama of your own life. And the same can be with sports, and the same can be with other shows, or today they call it reality shows. That makes it even more reality, because they call it a reality show, as opposed to the other shows as a so-called, it's like, reminds me of Coke and Diet Coke. They're both really, as Walter Matthau said, authentic imitation leather, They're both imitation, but one is authentic imitation and one is not authentic. So that's how superficial life can be. I'm not one of those that believes in fire and brimstone trying to attack all technology and television. Obviously they're gifts as well that can be used in ways to reach people and to reach and connect us in ways that is unprecedented in history. But at the same time, like every gift, if it's not used properly, if it's not used with moderation, it can become, like they say about any addiction, that the substance, who's the master and who's the slave. If television or technology, you the master and it's just your slave, so to speak, your tool, it's one thing. But if the tool becomes the master, and the tool and the and the carpenter or the human being becomes a slave, then we've got a problem. So, as a small introduction, I think it's a good way to address the topic that I wanted to talk about this evening, which is about love. And as we titled it, Love, Verb or Noun. And I think it's a good way to look at one of the most, and maybe the most important need in a person's life. Just like any plant, any part of life for sustenance requires water, requires moisture for life. And this is not just the plant world; it's also the human world. We are 90% water. The globe is covered by 2/3 of water. So the same is true. Love, which actually the Kabbalists compare to water, is an equally necessary component. And it's a good way to look at it. Just like nothing can grow without watering it, a human being cannot survive without love. And when we're deprived of love, especially at a young age, it's going to have its consequences. There's no two ways around it. Just like a plant will wither without love, we too will wither. And in a way, humans probably without love is even more disastrous than a plant, because a plant will ultimately wither and die, and that's it. We may stay alive, but still be dead inside. So nurturing and everything that love brings to us is a critical component in life, and yet it remains such an elusive force. You can't just go to a store, and just like you can buy bread or water or drinks or whatever it is that we need, you can't just go and buy love. As much as we would like to entertain the possibility, it just doesn't work that way. So it remains an elusive force, where, in a way, like a double-edged sword, as I discussed last week and many times in this class. But to really understand and analyze what love is and how we deal with it, I think a good way to put it is to ask the question, how you see love. Is it a verb? In other words, an action, an active state, or is it a noun, which means a state of being? And this is not just semantics and academics. It actually has severe consequences how you see love. You see, we live in a world of acquisitions and commodities. We purchase things, we acquire things, we hoard, we own things. And as such, we also sometimes look at love the same way. Love is something you acquire, which means it's a verb. It's a type of what we call a method. That's why you see an overemphasis on technique. People make love. You hear the expression. There's techniques, sexual techniques, love techniques, physical ones, emotional ones, psychological ones. Some people call it manipulation. We all manipulate each other in some ways. And some people say that's all right as long as it's mutual manipulation, so to speak. But it's all about really trying to acquire something. And therefore it's not a state of being. It's not just a noun. It's an active force. Which one could argue, what's wrong with saying that? Well, the problem with that is that if it's an active force in that sense, then you can say love is only there when there's the act. Do you love somebody when you're asleep, for example? And you think about it, if you really love somebody, you love them 24/7. Just take the simplest type of love of a child. Does a parent love a child only when you're hugging the child, only when you see your child? You love the child all the time. It's part of you. There are times where you express it like a verb. But love in that context is a noun. It's a state of being. It's part of who you are. Whereas if love was only something that is an action, meaning something that you have to stimulate, then you can argue that it's only there when you stimulate it. And when it's not stimulated, it's not there. Which ultimately turns love then into a very insecure type of state, because if it's not being stimulated, it's not really there. It's not unconditional. I'm going to elaborate more on this. I'm just saying this as like a so-called overview. So I want to discuss this topic, and it's obviously connected to who we are as human beings and how we see ourselves. Many times you ask somebody about personal identity, you ask someone, who are you? Most people will give you their business card. But a business card is not who you are, it's what you do. It's your verb, it's not your noun. It's not your state of being, who you are. As a matter of fact, to answer who am I, who are you, is not that simple. What are you? Are you a sum of your parts? What about all the parts that you're not aware of? What about your unconscious? Some people say who you are is something that is impossible to answer because we're not even aware of all those invisible forces that I alluded to earlier that really shape who you are. We have no memories of our young childhood. We don't know so many things about our inner selves. we do know is what we're doing. Right now, I can tell you what I am doing, what this one's, what you know what job you're doing, you know what you want to do. In other words, you can identify things that are an action or actions, what you're actively involved in. But to identify who you are, the noun, the state of being, the person you are as a state of being, is far, far more complicated. So you could almost say, if you, I don't want to sound like a cliche, but you could almost say is that the noun of your life, as opposed to, you move there to this and then, okay. No, it's all right. You may have to just come right up front here. Yeah, no. You could almost say the noun of your life is really the essence of who you are, and the verbs of your life is what the noun is actively involved in. In other words, as I referred to earlier, in a sense we have two parts to ourselves, our inner self and our outer self. The outer self is busy doing a lot of things. You have arms and you have legs and you have, as I said, eyes and ears, and you're active in all kinds of different things. And each of us have our own series of activities which define our lives, really. Our routines define our lives. Our habits become our routines become our life activities, and then our life activities suddenly become our identity. But that's not really the way it was meant to be. I think it was Gandhi that said something like that. I don't remember the exact line, but it's a beautiful line where he says that be careful, because your actions become your habits, and then your habits become your routines, and your routines become your patterns, and your patterns become your life investments, and then your life investments become your identity. When in truth, if you think about it chronologically, the order is the other way around. When we're born, we don't have any habits. We have no routines. We have no patterns. Where a newborn child is exploring the world for the first time, completely a clean slate. A completely clean slate. And then things begin to become imposed and shape that child. Parental attitudes, life experiences, disappointments, and we begin to adjust. And then we begin to become a product of our actions, of our activities. As we grow into adults, we grow older, what ends up happening is that our activities become so dominant of our lives that our identity has completely become obfuscated, and it's been replaced by what you do instead of who you are. Now, that wouldn't be a problem if what you do is a reflection of who you are. But the who you are had never really had time to develop. So it disappears in a way, it becomes concealed and overwhelmed by what you do. And once you get out of school, and you need to make a living, you need to make ends meet, then your job and your responsibilities and paying your bills and the struggle for survival takes over. And that becomes who you are. Not who you really are, but that becomes what you are doing. So your actions have become, as I said earlier, who defines what? Is it your identity that defines what you should be active in? Or is it your actions that suddenly becomes the way that defines your identity? And it comes to a point where you can't even distinguish between the two. And that's why when we look at ourselves right now in the mirror, each of us, you start saying, who am I? You say, well, if for the last 20 years I've been doing certain type of work, let's say it's been successful, or it's not been successful, it doesn't really matter. But that has become what you have been so identified with, it becomes your identity. When in truth, your identity may not be anything involved with what you did. Not that you didn't invest any part of yourself in it, but in no way does it reflect who you are. So we have essentially a dichotomy then between our inner self, we'll call that the identity, your noun, and the outer self, which is the activities we're involved in, the actions, the responsibilities, the commitments, including our relationships. So it shouldn't be a surprise or a wonder to anyone why it's so difficult to find love. Because the first question is, what are you looking for? Are you looking for something that will really complement and nourish your identity, your true identity, or will nourish and complement the identity you have assumed, which may not be even the real you? So it's not about sometimes people saying, how can I find my soulmate? Maybe the first question should be asked is, how do you find your own soul? If you don't have your own soul, your own identity, you think it's going to be easy to find another identity that complements that? You can't even know what is right. Many people, you ask them what kind of spouse they would like to find, the dream spouse. So, I mean, there's some conventional answers. You, of course, have a nice person, good looking, attractive, exciting, someone who has a secure job and can support I mean, these are very generic answers, obviously, and there's nothing wrong with them per se, but a lot has to do with externals, not necessarily internals. And the reason for that is because if you don't know who you are, it's very hard to define what you really need. So we have a problem. We go to school, and we grow up in a world that does not really train us to figure out who we really are. It teaches us a lot of good tools. The best education you'll get is a top school will give you excellent tools. So you can go out there, you have enough tools, enough connections, enough know-how to find a good secure job, a career. But a school or education that teaches us who you are, it's almost like a random luck thing. You grew up in the right type of family, and your family had that type of confidence and security and, I guess, nurturing and unconditional acceptance. So many of us have that confidence to have a deeper sense of self. If you unfortunately don't grow up in an environment like that, it's too bad. What I would like to talk about is that we're not victims. We could do something about all of this. And the reason, of course, I'm talking about it now is because we're in the month of Elul, which is a Hebrew month, the last month of the year that precedes the high holiday season. And this Hebrew month, as I mentioned, is really the month of love. It's a month that teaches us how to love, what is love. And I've been addressing each week another aspect of it. Last week I talked about the immature adult. That's been recorded. You could always look it up online. And today we're talking about what is love, verb or noun. Another reason I'm addressing it is because it's also connected to this week's Torah portion, which is it's not an accident. It's also in the month of Elul. So the beginning of this portion talks about the famous mitzvah of Bikurim, the first fruit offering. You know, technically the story goes like this, that the command comes to the Jewish people, that when you will enter, when you will enter the land that I have given you as a Yerusha, as a inheritance, you shall take from the first fruit and bring it as an offering to me, to God. It's really the basis of why in the morning when we say Moda'ani, it's like every first is an acknowledgement that before you begin, before you make it yours, you acknowledge the blessings and the gifts that were given to you. It's really an act of humility, essentially, recognizing you're not a self-made person, recognizing that the gifts we have come from a greater place. It's a certain humility in all of that. So that's this mitzvah right here. But the interesting contrast is this. The chapter is called Kisave, which means when you will enter, or you'll come into. And the previous chapter is actually, it says Kiseitse, when you'll go out. When you will go out to war. So if you compare these two opening sentences of last week's and this week's, you have the last week saying when you will go out to war, and this one is when you will enter into the land. Now, utilizing the principle that I often talk about here, that these verses and these ideas are much more than just the technical, mechanical part of Judaism, which so many of us who grew up with yeshivas know the mechanical part, but there's a whole other part which is the soul part. The psychological and spiritual meaning in all of this. And these words are loaded with layers and layers of meaning. And what I always talk about here is not the mechanical, the technical part you can read on your own or can go to other classes. But to understand the Torah as a blueprint for life, a relevant blueprint that addresses the issues that we struggle with in our lives today, that's something you don't really hear much about. So that's what I try to emphasize. So when you talk about this contrast, it's interesting. To go to war is considered to be going out to war. To go into the bringing of the first fruit or going into the land is considered an inner experience. So how do we understand that? Well, if you think about it, it's pretty obvious. The Torah is saying a very, very powerful point. You know, life is filled with battles. We all have our battles. We all have our struggles. Some of them are struggles with other people, you know, in a real way. People you don't get along with, people you have conflicts with, whether it's at work, whether it's financial, whether it's emotional, whether it's in relationships. You know, what they say, what is the kid asks marriage counsel, what's the difference between an engagement and what do they call it? Engagement and marriage? He says engagement is what happens before the battle. You know? So some people say all relationships are a form of a battle. And then we have, of course, the battles within ourselves. Our psychological battles. The different conflicts between what our mind tells us, what our heart tells us, the conflicts, psychological, the wounds that haunt us, the voices, the ghosts, and so on. So, in dealing with the conflicts of life, simply on a therapeutic, psychological level, the Torah is saying, always remember that you may have wars and battles to fight, but remember they're never to be fought inside of you. Kiseitse, go out to war. Realize these battles are outside of you. Why is that so relevant? Because it means don't let it contaminate your own psyche. As I said, we've all have conflicts, but what happens worst of all is that it becomes a cancer and you personalize it. I've seen wars for people who are still fighting wars for years and years, because it comes to a point of pride and ego that they've so personalized it that the war is no longer being fought in a battlefield, it's being fought 24/7 in your heart and soul. You're consumed with it. You ever see someone gets consumed with something? And what happens is, even if it's a legitimate battle, and even if you're right and the other person is wrong, but you win the battle, you lose the war, because it so drains and wears you down, it's eating you up alive. And I've seen this many times. Sometimes you have to stop yourself when you get in a place, especially if you have true grievances and you've been hurt or betrayed, and you have legitimate reason to really be angry. But the key thing the Torah is telling us, never let the battle contaminate the pure essence of who you are. And that goes back to what I said earlier. We have an outer life and we have an inner life. And we cannot allow the outer to take control of the inner. If you look at young children, newborn children, they have no fights with anyone. Because they're pure, they're not political, their egos are not yet developed, they don't have their turf, so to speak. Even when little children get into a fight and they say, I'll never talk to you again the rest of my life, the 30 seconds they're the best friends again. You get to older people, you can go into certain nursing homes, two people who are best friends for 40, 50 years in their lives, they won't talk to each other even though they sit near each other. And we ask one of them, how much longer do you have to live? You were one's best friend. He says, I can't say anything to him because if I say something to him, he'll think he was right. Little children don't think like that. We think like that. We have to win. So it's not so much what is, and sometimes we justify that that's what's right. I'm fighting for the principle of being right. When in fact it really may be your own personal thing. And even when you're right, you see the greatest people in history, even when they were right, they were able to move on. Joseph was very right to be angry at his brothers when they sold him into slavery and almost killed him. In 22 years he was separated. And yet when he met them and they reunited, he told them, despite their shame and their embarrassment, he said, you did not send me here. Even though they sold him into slavery. It's God that led me here. It's one of the greatest acts of nobility. I can't say we can expect that from every human being. But the Torah tells it to us for a reason, because there is an element what's called ma'ivir al midaisav, a person who's able to overlook their feelings. And many times when you overlook your feelings, God overlooks his feelings also, because we're all not perfect. How you treat others will be how you'll be treated. Because if you're harsh with everyone around you, then you basically opened up you've already essentially passed the decree how you should be treated, also being harshly. So the approach of understanding that battles have to be fought outside of ourselves is a very, very powerful and far-reaching attitude. Even if a battle has to be fought, remember, kiseitse, you go out to war. You don't bring it into your home. On a very practical level, you don't bring it to your dinner table. You don't bring it to your children. You don't let it extend into your family. I've seen wars where not only one person is fighting, their children are involved, the wife is involved, the husband's involved, everybody there. No one talks to each other. It carries on for generations. And even if it's a completely legitimate grievance, I don't know how healthy that is for anyone. Especially for the people who are allowing it to penetrate your life. Which is one of the big problems in general when we talk psychologically. You've been hurt by someone, let's say by a parent, and you have legitimate grievance, you have legitimate anger, and legitimately demand and require accountability. The question is, do you remain a victim of that person's crime? And very often, this doesn't mean you have to forgive a parent, but mean you have to forgive yourself. Because as long as you're still carrying it, it means that that person is controlling your life, whether you like it or not. And that is even worse than the original crime. The real healthy growing is growing out of it to the point where, you know what? Even if that person has not asked for forgiveness, even if they have no remorse, you have to free yourself from their behavior. And that's a whole separate type of work. So that's the experience, that's dealing with the outer battles. We have to fight, wars are outside of you. But then there's another part of ourselves. And that's the second chapter here that we read this week, Kisave, that you enter into. The word Save, which means to come, or to enter, in a more, let's call it, more mystical or Hasidic type of terminology, it means to enter bepnimius. It means to enter, truly enter into someone. Think of it in terms of a relationship, two people who really love each other or care about each other. There's an element of bonding and intimacy, and I don't just mean this physically, where they actually enter into each other's soul. They enter into each other's heart. And they allow themselves to enter. You know, someone you don't trust, or someone you don't know, you're going to have a wall, defense mechanisms that will not let someone enter into you. You're not going to let them enter. You don't want them to manipulate you. You're fearful, or at least as long as you don't know them, you're not going to open up. Someone that you love and you trust, you open up to. You allow them to enter into your life. So the battles should not be allowed to enter. But then there's something else that should be allowed to enter, and that's what this chapter talks about. So it's very appropriate to this concept that I was discussing about the verb and the noun, about love. Because love too, as I said, has two parts to it. There's how it's expressed, which is a series of verbs and methods and techniques and actions. But then there's the love that's within you, and that's your heart. That's a state of being. And this brings me into analyzing it a little further. Let's discuss this noun part of love. To argue that love is an action, only an action, and only a verb, would really be saying that you're one thing, and the love you have is something outside of you. Important, but something outside of you. The example I used before, let's say when you water plants, so the water is not part of the plant. The water is an outside force that nourishes the plants. No different than food we eat, or the drink, or the liquid we drink. That is something outside of us that nourishes and sustains us. Now, if love is equal to that, then love is like an outside force that we need. So we go out to acquire it. So initially seems to make sense. Judaism teaches us that's not the case. Love is who you are. You're actually an embodiment of love. Your soul is a loving entity. It's not only going out to get love and someone else. You are born as a loving human being, someone worthy of love, and someone capable of loving, both giving and receiving. Let's define what that means, because love, in the Hebrew terminology for love, is chesed. So if you're familiar with the spheres, and we've discussed this, if you know the book I've done on the Omer, the counting of the Omer, the 7 times 7. So chesed is the first of the 7 emotions. According to the Kabbalah, according to the mystics, the DNA, the building blocks of our emotional makeup, our emotional DNA, consists of 7 emotions, with the first one being chesed, called love. Chesed, called love, is Gema the Azalim Kuli Yemen. It means it is the root and the source of all other emotions. Just for the record, the other 6 emotions are discipline, compassion, endurance, humility, bonding, and dignity. But the first and the driving force of all is chesed, love. There's a verse that says, Olam chesed yibana, which has 2 interpretations. The world was built with chesed. It can mean built with chesed, or chesed is the first building block, or the Elam chesed yibana, that what is the second interpretation? It's really not relevant to our discussion here, but the second interpretation is that chesed, that once there is a world, we bring chesed into that world. But the first interpretation is that chesed, love, builds this universe. In other words, chesed, love, is the essence that defines existence. And to go to it in the root level, think of it this way. For existence to have come into being, from a Torah point of view, God needed to have love. Because why else would he create an existence outside of himself? So it was the love that God wanted to have, a relationship with something that is an independent entity called us, that is the driving force of why we exist. And if you think about it in the human terms, we in a sense emulate that. 2 people who love each other give birth to a child. Why is it that the birth of a child is a direct result of two people who love each other is because love is the root of relationships. So it's the chesed that we have, the love that we have, that gives birth to things. Love, in essence, we are essentially, as I said, our souls are defined by love. So chesed is not just an act. It's not just an outside experience outside of ourselves. It's actually the essential part of who we are. It's one of the building blocks, as I said, the number one building block that defines what the soul is made of. So our souls are comprised of, first and foremost, love. So in that sense, love is, as I said, is our state of being. Now if you think of it that way, it really has pretty far-reaching implications. It then means that, that each of us, whether we know it or not, is a walking piece of love. Let's put it that way. So when we say, for example, in the beginning of the Torah in the Bible, it says that the human being was created in the divine image. What does it mean, the divine image? So that's a very abstract term that has many different meanings. But what we can say is that we are made of we are essentially divine entities. And what is a divine entity? A divine entity is an entity that is able to love. An entity that is loving. So if we're all born as, if you were able to define the human being as being a lover, or a person that loves, and that's how our essence is, then the rest of life is really commentary, actually using Hillel's statement, that the entire Torah is loving another, and everything else is commentary. The same is true in this sense. We're born as pieces of love, walking a piece of love inside of a body, and then the rest of our life is figuring out how that should be expressed, and how that should be experienced. So that really defines in a sense the essential inner identity of the human being as being one word, love. That is why love is such a resonating experience inside of us, because it's not something that is superimposed. It's not like at some point in your life you need love in your life. It's not true. As soon as you're born, you need love. I'll go even a step further. When a child is in its mother's womb, for 9 months it's submerged in a loving environment. Chava, shut that off. Shut it. For 9 months it's submerged in the embryonic fluids which nurture it, feed it, and so on. So in a sense, before we even enter this world, we are completely submerged in a loving environment. And it's not an accident that water is compared to love, as I said earlier. Love is a metaphor for love is water. And interestingly, according to the sages, it says that the world too, the universe too, was first completely submerged in water before land and water separated. So think of it like fish in the sea. Fish in the sea are constantly in a nurtured state. They always know, consciously and unconsciously, that they are submerged in the waters of life. We, human beings, have the concept called existential loneliness, where we can feel disconnected. Am I alone in this world? Does anyone care about my problems, my pain? You can walk down the street and feel completely lonely. That type of experience is because there's, in the existence as we know, there's a certain element of disconnection, a certain element of not feeling that we are connected to something greater. Then there are times in our lives where you just feel you fit in, you belong. It could be because of the people that care about you. It could be because of sustaining in nature. It can be you can just put headphones and listen to music and feel like you're submerged underwater. There's something about that imagery of being submerged in water that resonates with us. And you'll hear that when any person really falls in love or experiences love or any type of true resonating experience, they'll always describe it as being consumed by something. It's as if you're submerged in something greater than you are. It's a sense of belonging. It's a sense of being cared for. It's a sense of being protected. A sense that someone is embracing you. What is an embrace at the end of the day? It's an embrace is somebody who cares about you, hugs you. So they completely surround you in an embrace of love. The sukkah that we'll be sitting in is compared to a hug, a cosmic hug. the talid that we wear during prayer service surrounds us completely. You'll find in Judaism many different experiences that are all-encompassing. They're meant to be that type of like embrace. And children, when a child falls, when a child cries, what does a good parent do? You hold the child. You hug the child. You cradle the child. It's all examples of feeling submerged. It's like the fish inside of water. So to give us a head start in life, God made it in a way that 9 months, you don't have to ask for it. No matter what kind of mother you have, functional, dysfunctional, she has no choice. She has to carry a child. I mean, she has a choice what she'll do during that pregnancy, and it could be destructive things too, God forbid. But the child, in most cases, will be protected simply by merit of being carried by another human being. And the rest of life is trying to find that type of paradise. It's like trying to discover back to Eden, back to paradise, trying to return to that type of connection. So when we find kindred spirits and we find people we connect with, that's the feeling. You feel like, sometimes you meet somebody and it's like a long-lost friend, a kindred spirit. What are you really feeling? You're feeling connection. There's something about connection that is extremely, warming and nurturing to our lives. And you really can appreciate it by contrast of disconnection, when you feel disconnected. When you're around people that are strange, that people who are hostile, you feel disconnected. And we all know that word, connection, disconnection. So in that sense, love and the nurturing that it brings is all about really connection. And going back to the fish in water, what is ultimately the fish in water? Is a fish connected to its source, surrounded by its source. That type of experience is one of the most powerful experiences in life. And as such, if you think of it that way, then love is not at all a series of techniques and desperate attempts to gain something, to gain some experience. Unfortunately, we look in the world in which we live, you'll see so much emphasis, so much obsession with technique. Sexual technique, love technique, here's how you do it, here's how you date, 10 steps, 20 steps, what to do, what not to do. I mean, how many books have been written about this? And people are always reading these articles because it's like you think this is the article that's going to teach me the tricks of the trade. And you read them all, and let's be honest. Has it made relationships better? I mean, people wouldn't be reading them if it's really working, I guess. Right? So they continue to sell, and they continue to attract us. You know why? Because there's a deep void. And when you don't have the noun, you look for the verb. When you don't have the state of being, you look for the action that's going to make it happen. And this is the world in which we live. This is where marketing and advertising and selling things takes on a complete obscene, grotesque shape. It's trying to sell you something that cannot be bought. It's trying to sell you when every time you look at a magazine, you look at an advertisement, and you love the images that are being presented, whether it's the clothing, the hairstyles, the car, the exotic country. It's trying to sell you intimacy. They're trying to sell you a connection. But it's being sold through a commodity. Take this perfume, try this, do this, buy this, and you'll nurture and you'll satisfy your inner self. It's, in truth, if you think about it, it's actually a contradiction of terms. So when you think of love as something that is your birthright, not only your birthright, that you are a piece of love. A noun, let's call it a noun, not an act. People say they will make love. They will. That is, in a sense, even though it doesn't sounds innocent, it's actually a destructive statement because it's essentially turning love, instead of something that is within, as an act. And if you don't have the act, you don't have the love. That's not true. As I mentioned before, when a parent loves a child, there's no act necessary. It's good, yes, it's healthy that the noun, the state of being, expresses itself in a certain way. I'll address that in a moment. But you love your child 24/7, even when the child is asleep, even when you're asleep, even when the child is at school and you're not seeing the child, even when there's no active interaction. Love is love. It's a state of being. And the truth is, as I said, it's not just, I'm just using it as an example, each of us is natural love, which is why children by nature just elicit from us hugs and kisses and just that type of affection, without any effort. Unless a person is callous, or themselves, they don't love themselves, they will naturally smile to a child. And actually, there's those that don't smile, and those children are always aware of those that have problems. There's a real problem. The natural sense is because a child is a piece of love. A soul is love. Not a soul loves, a soul is love. It's a whole different experience. Now, some people separate between these two. I've heard this from some psychologists, that they say love for a woman is a noun, and for a man it's a verb. And they even emphasize it with even the biological, physiological structures, that men need an act to make love, and a woman, love is something that's eternal. She receives. Now, there may be some truth to it, but the truth is that love is a noun for everybody, including a man or a woman. Everybody has to have an expression of it as well, because you also have the other extreme, where people only say, listen, I love my child, but I never have to express it because I'm always loving that child without expressing. That's also not accurate. In the world that we live in, we do live in a world of action. We do live in a world of expression. So just to say that your heart and soul, deep in your unconscious, you love someone, but you never express it, is also not healthy. But the other way around is also wrong. To say that it's only a sum total of our expressions is not correct. Now, this definitely turns over, if you think about it, the whole concept of love. Because it's not like, okay, I'm looking for someone to love. I'm looking for love in my life. That's a very common statement. I haven't found it yet. I haven't found the love of my life. From a Torah point of view, that's really an inaccurate statement. The statement, the way it should be stated, to be more, let's put it scientifically correct, would say, love is with you all the time. It's part of who you are. The question is, have you found the person that connects to that love inside of you? And do you connect to the love inside of that person? Sometimes when we call the soulmates, what is actually a soulmate? From the Torah point of view, it means that souls, before they came down to this earth, were in a state of love, and each soul has its soulmate. And then they're born into two separate bodies, this one soul, and these two bodies can be in two different countries, foreign to each other, strangers, they may never even know of each other, and then the day comes when they connect. It's not connecting, it's reconnecting. And that's why it's like what's called resonance. Like when you hear music, and the music resonates, means you hear something that you always knew was there. Which essentially is saying that the love was always there, it's just that you weren't aware of it. Which in other words is saying that from the youngest age, we are essentially pieces of love, as I mentioned. We're entities called love. Then the outer life takes over, as I described at length earlier. And we begin to be shaped and identified not by who we are, but by what we do and how we perform and our marks in school, and then later what we earn and our buying power and our productivity and our looks and all the thousands of other externals that become our ID. And what happens as a result, unfortunately, what is obscured and obfuscated is the identity within, the identity that's called love. So now that instead of identifying yourself by who you are, you identify by yourself what you do, so then of course you're going to naturally look for love in an active form of what you do. Because this is how you identify yourself. But if you're able to reconnect to a place where you are who you are, before you became an active force in life, and this is your job, and these are your relationships, and this is people expect things of you, and this is how people see you, if you're able to connect to that place, the search for love takes on a whole different shape. Because you're not looking for some type of external experience, even if it's profound, you're looking for something that is an extension of yourself, of the real you. People who love in that way love everybody and love all the time. You don't find many people like that. You meet people who really just love human beings. And I mean in a healthy way. You may even saying that today sounds somewhat like, what's the word for it, sleazy. But the people who just naturally love other human beings, and not in a sexual way, and not in any obscene way, we're talking about just a natural respect, natural a natural respect for the sanctity of another person's soul. You rarely find people that have that across the board to everyone at all time. Now let me just qualify. This doesn't mean that you're naive, that person is naive and doesn't understand that some people are doing something wrong, some people are criminals. We're talking about an experience, we talk about an experience that you, because you have love, because that person is a embodiment of love, therefore love is always gushing and oozing out of them. Now, they have to obviously have discretion, as I said, how to express it and when to express it. There's a statement in the Sefer HaBoher. You may have heard of this book. It's called the Book of Boher, means illumination. It's it's a close cousin to the book of the Zohar, which is, Zohar also means illumination. Zohar means splendor. So Sefer HaBoher is one of the early Kabbalistic works that they're written in the time of the Talmud. As a matter of fact, the Sefer HaBoher has an excellent translation by Aryeh Kaplan in English. And in this book, there's a statement that says the following. I'll explain it. First, let me make the statement, then I'll explain it. The statement goes like this. That from the time that Abraham was born, Chesed said to God, you no longer need me, because now there's Abraham on earth. That's the expression. So let me explain what this is. I referred earlier, and I'll elaborate a bit more. In the Kabbalistic scheme of things, or let's call it like the mystical or the spiritual DNA, building blocks of existence, I mentioned there's 7 building blocks. Chesed through Malchus. Love, discipline, as I said, compassion and endurance, humility, bonding, and dignity. Or in Hebrew, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod Yesod, and Malchus. There's also 3 more intellectual ones, Chachma, Bina, Das, but that's not so relevant to our discussion here. These are, essentially, they are archetypes. There's 7 or 10 archetypes that when in the proper configurations will create an essential energy that shapes everything in existence. So anything you look at is some form of configuration of these forces. Think of it like the elements or the molecules or the atoms or subatomic particles. Like water is H2O, right? So the 2 elements of hydrogen, 1 of oxygen is water. Same thing is everything in this universe is some kind of combination of Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod Yesod, and Malchus. As I said in the Omer book that I wrote, I do the Chesed of Chesed, the Gvura of Chesed, the 49 configurations of Chesed through Malchus. But the configurations multiply many, many times over. So you're looking right now at this room. So we see bookcases, floors, tables, chairs, people. Scientists may define this room differently by saying what are the elements that shape this room. And a Kabbalist will tell you what you see in this room is a lot of Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, all in different combinations, some screwed up combinations too. But it's a configuration of inner forces. So just like a doctor takes an X-ray or a CAT scan of the person's body and shows you what makes you tick, the Kabbalistic structure also tells us what makes the universe tick. And in that sense, when someone has that vision and that type of perspective, they can actually see. Not necessarily with the physical eyes, but they can talk to someone and get a sense, a diagnosis of where their chesed is like, where their gvur is like, where their teferes is like, where their strengths, where their weaknesses, where you need supplements. Just like a doctor will tell you, you need calcium supplements, you need iron supplement. Here you have too much of certain vitamins or minerals. So same thing is psychologically and emotionally and spiritually. The soul doctor can tell you what areas in your life are maybe overabundant, where there's deficiencies, where you need to supplement, where you need to complement, etc., etc. So the perfect human being, or the perfect structure, is what's called in the Kabbalistic terminology is the world of Atzilut. In the world of Atzilut, the configuration of the 10 spheres is as perfect as it gets. It's like the perfect child. When a healthy child is born, they breathe perfectly. You see the chest heaves, the lungs are being used completely, the arteries and the capillaries and the veins are all clear. Toxins have not yet entered into the body. So a newborn child is as perfect as it gets. A newborn healthy child. And then the world and life begins to wear us down. So you begin to consume and you begin to inhale toxins. You begin to be affected by the world around you. And then at some point your body is no longer as it was when you were a newborn. Question is how far you can go. Now, obviously the body is very resilient. It has ways to compensate, and it has ways to expand, and it can can handle a lot of pressure and a lot of deficiency. But then, God forbid, there's a point where every human body, a point of that a line you shouldn't cross. So the same thing psychologically, emotionally. There's the quintessential, perfect archetype of how the 10 spheres work. And then there's how those spheres begin to assume distortions as they are shaped by life around us. So every newborn child is born with a perfect capacity to love and to be loved. Where does it get messed up? It gets messed up by the first adults that the child encounters. The parents don't know how to love well, so they begin to basically distort the child's natural loving abilities. This is why it's so tragic. So think of it like, freshly fallen snow, beautiful and white and pure and pristine, and then begin the first people walking on it until it becomes quite dirty, quite polluted. So this is why parenting is such a great responsibility and gift, but also can do so much damage. Because you're taking the perfect archetype and you're actually shaping it. Now, things that are not in our control, life will affect everybody. What we breathe and the world in which we live, some things are not in our control. But there are many things that are in our control. Parents control the environment in their home. There's no ifs and buts about it. And they're absolutely responsible. And it's not an excuse to say, my parents screwed it up for me, therefore I have entitled or I have no control. That's why we're adults, and that's why we have to impose upon ourselves and educate and discipline ourselves. I mean, this is an aside, but I'm just making the point. Because you're dealing here with freshly fallen snow, with a pure configuration, and you're single-handedly, you as a parent, can destroy that. And maybe destroy is a strong word. You can distort it to the point where it gets very difficult to retrace the steps again. So the reason we study, and those that are mastered the 10 spheres, when they see a human being, each of us, you can juxtapose a person as you are right now, juxtapose that, how we are with our distortions over the perfect archetype of how the spheres exist in the world of Atzilut. And when you see that, you can see blatantly what is out of sync. So think of having a perfect circle as a backdrop, and then you juxtapose a jagged or broken circle, you can immediately see what is missing, what is extra, where it's incomplete, what needs help, repair, healing. The same is here. The more you understand the internal DNA of the soul's structure, the more you can look at a person and say how far that person has wandered from what they are really capable of. That's why that backdrop is so critical. So going back to the Sefer HaBoyer, explaining it, this is what happens. Chesed of Atzilus, the archetype and pure element of Chesed, when Abraham came to this world, says to God, you no longer need me because you have a man on this earth that is a reflection of the perfect love. So Abraham is the embodiment of Chesed on this earth. It's not that Abraham just loved, he was a lover. Love was a noun for him, not a verb. I remember once giving a class and I was talking about the difference between a person who does good things and a person who's a good person. What's the difference between a good person and a person who does good things? Now it may sound semantic, but it's not. The difference is a person who does good things is only good while they're doing those good things. A good person is good 24/7, even when they are asleep. And where do you see the distinction? Where, what does they say, nafkamina? My benayu, what difference is there? When it's inconvenient. The person who does good things will do good things when it's convenient or it's on their terms, on his or her terms. A good person does things good even when it's not convenient for them. I gave this talk. At the end of the class, there was a fellow right here in this room. It wasn't this room, it was a different room, but it was the same idea. Wanted to speak to me privately, so he waited till everyone left, which was a while, and we ended up speaking, and he said to me, with tears in his eyes, he was probably late 40s, early 50s. He said to me, tonight you answered a dilemma that I have now for close to 35 years, 40 years, since I'm a child. And the dilemma was, my father was considered to be a good man. And he passed away. He was a philanthropist, very wealthy, very successful, he tells me. And he helped anyone. He had Tuesday night, I remember, from the earliest memories of my childhood, one of the most beautiful memories. With Tuesday night, anyone can come to see, anyone who wanted could come see my father. His doors were open. And he was usually not accessible because he was a successful person. People knew who he was. Tuesday night, anyone came to open the door. The door was open. He would give a loan, charity, a job, a favor, a phone call. Anyone can come. You don't have many people who just open their doors that way. But then there was another side to my father, he tells me, that was not very nice. He was times he was very cruel to my mother, to me, to my siblings. And if you came Wednesday night, not Tuesday night, when he had his weekly poker game, nobody was allowed in, no matter who. And I always, as a child, you're conflicted. On one hand, you see such beauty, such kindness, such generosity. On the other hand, you see a certain callousness, a certain insensitivity. I never really could figure out my father. And you answered the question to me tonight. My father was a man who did good things. He wasn't necessarily a good man. And he didn't say to me, he's telling this to me, he wasn't saying it like being critical of his father. He said, my father, probably Tuesday night, that's the custom that he maybe inherited from his father. He gets all the credit for it, because most people don't even do that. But it was not when it was inconvenient for him. It was not when it was not on his terms. On his terms, that's what he wanted to do. So I give him credit for that. But he never went out of his way when it was not convenient for him. That was part of his regimen. I don't know, look, when people share their lives with someone, with myself, I'm not there to challenge or judge. He wanted to share this with me. I really didn't comment much. I listened. And it's a child goes through different experiences in understanding their parent, and they get older. You want to really make sense of things. And I didn't ask him, what meant that his father was cruel. I guess it must have been serious if it really bothered him. Cruel didn't mean that his father yelled at him once or twice. It meant that there was a real inconsistency there. And I remember the story, it's years ago when it happened, but it struck me as it was very good, it very much captured the theme that I was discussing, and very much what we're discussing now. So to do good things is a verb, is actions. To be a good person is a noun, is a state of being. Abraham was not just a man who did good things. He was embodiment of love. So Chesed of Atzilus comes to God and says, what do you need me for anymore? We have the archetype. Here's a man on earth. If you cut his veins, love will come out, not blood. He is blood. He is walking love. And Abraham lived that way. And it was unconditional. It was to friends and to strangers. It was to people who believed what he believed in and people who didn't believe what he believed in. And it was even to infidels when he prays for the city of Sodom and begs God to not destroy that city, no matter how wicked, because maybe there's a tzaddik, maybe there's 50 tzaddik. It wasn't because he was tolerating evil and being a wimp, or trying to just be a liberal that just accepts and makes believe there's no such thing as evil in this world. And I don't mean to in any way belittle liberals. I mean the stereotype of liberals in that way, that are seen as having basically no strong moral standards. It's not my definition of a liberal. I think liberalism is a Jewish concept that comes from Abraham. It's called social liberalism. Jews were always social liberals. The whole Torah is based on helping those that have less than us. Charity, tzedakah, chesed, and so on. So another thing is, political liberals. I think there's a big distortion in that. It's a complete parenthesis here that's not relevant to our discussion. There's a thing called political liberal, and there's a social liberal. I think Jews have always been social liberals, but today there's been confusion of these lines. It's become political, and it has all other implications. But to go back to Abraham, was a man that just loved. It says, Echad hayavram. Abraham was a singular individual. No one was ever like him. Avram oyavi. God says on Abraham, a statement that he says on Noun, Abraham, my lover, the one who loves me. Now, did Moses not love God? Did thousands of other people not love? But Abraham was chesed. Just like Yitzchak was pachad, Yitzchak was gvura, the embodiment and archetype of gvura, of discipline, and Jacob was the embodiment and archetype of tiferes. Abraham was chesed. And we each have an Abraham within us. So love is not just something we look for, something we do, something we receive. It is who you are. Is the essence of a soul is love. And that's a whole different thing than just that because you have a soul, that's why you love other people. It's a whole different thing to say the soul is love. And therefore, when you love, When you give, or when you receive love, it's very much an extension of who you are. So the verb is necessary, but the verb is an extension of the noun. So the state of being acts accordingly. When you are consistent with who you are and what you do, you'll be a loving human being. The dichotomy of life and the reason we become not so loving in this world is because we become disconnected of who you are and what you do. When your life is defined, as I said earlier, by sensory stimulation, or by the things you do, or by the things that have been done to you, then obviously love is one piece of the puzzle. And it becomes obscured, and who you are becomes obfuscated, and the rest of it is all about what you're going to do. So if someone hurts you, you figure out a way how to get even. You know, if you were really shining from within, who would define who you are and how you act? It would be your inner sense of self. Now, how many people have you met in this world, in life, that the way they behave is always defined by from within, not from without? It's very uncommon. You can wake up in the morning, be in a great mood, ready to take on anything. You go to work, someone says the wrong thing to you, or you're driving you're walking in the street and someone cuts you off or something, it can destroy your whole day. The perfect example of a person who's not in control of their lives. Now, it's a pretty harsh statement that I'm making now, but that's pretty much a sign of it. Because it's not the inner captain of who you are that defines what's going to happen that day. Someone says the wrong thing, and they take control of your life. That's the best sign of a person who's like, yeah, so when the ship is in the ocean and there's no storm, it may look like it's in control, but then a storm strikes and the ship starts being schlepped in every possible direction. You know, there's no captain. So we can create an illusion that we're in control as long as everything is going smoothly. But as soon as there's some crisis, there's some challenge to you, you'll find out very quickly who's in control. And it's usually not you. Someone says something, someone does something, and it can completely take over your life. It's a pretty big sign that you're lacking a very solid base. Because it's the winds of change and the winds around you that are defining what you're going to do. This doesn't mean that a person who's a solid inner sense of confidence doesn't react when somebody does something to them. I'm not suggesting that, someone insults you, but it doesn't change your life. It doesn't consume your life. It doesn't change your plan. You run the show. But it can only be possible if you have a show to run. If your inner identity is the main thing of that defines who you are. So what's the first statement, and the first maybe most saddest statement? When Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge, and then they cover themselves, because they're suddenly aware of their sexuality. They're suddenly aware of a consciousness, which itself is a sense of being outside of yourself. You're conscious. People who are very, very comfortable, very honest, and very pure are not conscious. They don't have to be self-conscious because there's nothing to be self-conscious about. So even consciousness, you can say, is almost a world of dichotomy where the object and the subject have become two, so you're conscious. Just to give you an example, when a person is in the zone, whether it's an artist, or it's an athlete, or it's a writer, or any of us, when you're in the zone, you're completely immersed in something that you really enjoy doing. There's no subject and object. The division between subject and object, between you and what you're doing, melts down. That's why you can suddenly be up all night involved in something you really love, and then suddenly you wake up, you suddenly realize, hey, I'm tired, I'm hungry, hours have passed. You have that experience. It's a good experience. It means that while those hours were passed, you were completely immersed, in a good way. That type of immersion is a perfect example. It's almost going back to that childhood state that I mentioned. Children are not self-conscious. Who makes children self-conscious? Adults. When adults start saying, don't do this, do that, they start imposing their own attitudes on children. Children are not self-conscious. Not about their sexuality, not about their identity, not about playing all day, about exploring the world. A child is a seamless force. Because as I said, a child coming to this world has not yet been shaped by man-made institutions and attitudes. So when Adam and Eve became conscious of themselves, what happens? They cover themselves. They recognize their sexuality. They recognize that suddenly I'm here. I have an ego. I'm a personality. And then God comes into the garden, the Torah says, and Adam hides. So God says to Adam, Ayeko, where are you? And the question is asked, what do you mean, where are you? God doesn't know where Adam is. God cannot see everything. So the answer given is that God, of course, he knew where he was physically. He didn't recognize Adam because Adam's identity, Adam didn't recognize himself. I don't recognize the love, the divine image in which you were created. It's become masked, concealed. So sometimes you sit with someone, they're right across you and they say, where are you? You know where they're sitting there. You mean where they've spaced out. Where are you emotionally? I don't feel that you're with me. God said, I don't recognize you anymore. I don't recognize your identity. You've become a product of your actions instead of someone that is a state of being. And that ayeka, in a sense, is the question that's asked each of us. You know, who are you? And the answer is, I'll give you my business card, or I'll tell you what I do, what I've accomplished, and my awards, and all the things that I've contributed. Those are things you've done. No one takes away the credit for that, but it's not who you are necessarily. It may be a little reflection of who you are. That inner identity is what we look for. And that's what we're asked this month, especially as we go into Rosh Hashanah, ayeka. Where are you? And it's interesting that the ayeka question, which is where are you, has the same letters as the word echa. Pronounced differently, ayeka, aleph, yud, chof, hey. Where are you can also be pronounced echa, which is the opening of the book of Lamentations that we read on Tisha B'Av, the saddest day of the year, which means how? Eich, how? How is it possible? Some say echa comes from the word woe onto Jerusalem, that she sits all alone after the devastation, after the destruction of the temple. Some say echa comes from the word oy ve, like, oy, how bad it is. So it's interesting that ayeka is essentially the root of the echa, because when a person loses sense of their identity, if you lose sense of who you are, the next thing is how you've come where you are. How have you wandered away from your life is a direct result of not knowing who you are. So when things happen in people's lives that are not necessarily pleasant, it's not necessarily pointing fingers that you yourself are at fault, but it in some way can be traced to who you are. If you don't know who you are, you're ultimately going to start asking, how did I reach where I am today? So some people come and they're 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, and they start wondering, how have I missed the boat? How did I lose these opportunities? Echa becomes their big question. How? Or woe. But it's rooted in the first ayeka. Where? If you knew ayeka, where are you? You'd be able to figure out how you've wandered. So think of it this way: a person ends up betraying a part of themselves, their destiny, their lives. They betrayed their own love. They betrayed themselves as loving human beings. And when you wander off the road, you don't wander immediately off the road. You end up somewhere lost. It takes a long time to get lost. To retrace the steps, you have to get to that one point where you'd made that first swerve, the first wrong turn. In the case of Adam and Eve, the first wrong turn was their consciousness, where they became self-identity. They became disconnected from their inner identities. They became defined by what they do. And that was the beginning. And as soon as that ayeka, where are you, began, it wasn't long until they would end up being in a place where echa, how did you get here? So the identity issue is always at the root of how we get to the wrong places in our lives, how we make bad decisions. It doesn't start on its own. It's always a result of a vacuum. So to go back to this theme here, therefore, if love is the essence of who you are, and it's a latent force that defines your identity, it's a whole different way of looking at a person. Because then basically you're saying is, okay, you are an entity called love. The love may have become obscured. You may have wandered away from it, but it's still part of who you are. It's still what makes you tick. So it doesn't matter how you identify yourself today. The fact is that always remains there like a pilot flame. That's a whole different approach to a human being than to say that you've lost something. People say, I've lost my innocence. I'm damaged goods. There's no way back. In Judaism, that's not the case. And that goes back to Kisava. There's always a way back. Because you see your soul, no matter how blocked and how fractured and how polluted your arteries may become, God forbid, the heart or the essence of the soul and its love remains intact. And that's a whole different approach, because then it's just a matter of how do you reconnect. It's not that you lost something and then now how you're going to ever regain it. It's there, but it's become very deeply concealed. So the process that we go through in the month of Elul, the process we go through during these days, these 60 days, these 30 days, and including the high holidays, it's really about how to revisit or regain, reclaim the love that we all are made of. That's really what it's about. Moses understood it very clearly, which is why he would not take no for an answer, and he did not give up as he relentlessly pursued forgiveness, because he knew that you cut to the core, you're going to find love. You know, if you know that if you cut to the root, the core, that you'll find water, then you don't give up. He had that confidence. He was absolutely sure that's what it's like, because he understood what the essence of God is about, what the essence of human beings are about. That love is the essence of our lives. Whereas if a person doesn't have that type of confidence and doesn't accept that that is the inner identity, then you could say to yourself, you know, I missed the boat. I made mistakes. They're irreversible. There's no way back. That fatalistic attitude is obviously itself part of the problem, because a person who believes that about themselves, very difficult to get them to make any moves, because they've given up. Once a person has given up, what can you really do? Even if you have confidence in someone you love, and you believe in them, and you know that they can reach heights, great heights, but if they don't believe in themselves, it's very difficult, because you can't live their life for them. And that's often what happens, that people, because of what has happened to them in life, they become defined by those events. It goes back again to the action and the noun. You know, you can suffer. The question is, have you become a sufferer? You can be in pain. The question is, have you become pain? The counterforce of that is that even if you don't love, or you have lost ways to love, or you have not been loved, that doesn't mean you're not loved. Because love is your birthright, is the essence of what your soul is like. Now, this is really a perspective that the Torah presents to us. And it's a very good perspective to compare to what do you think about it. That's why I'm spelling it out in such strong terms, because most of us are not educated. We're not taught that this is the way to look at ourselves. You know, if we're taught anything, we're usually taught that life is pretty fatalistic, that you are a product of your circumstances and a victim of their circumstances. You know, you need someone to teach you, to show you, and to demonstrate that that's not who you are. Who you think you are is not who you are. And if there's any hope for any healing in a person's life, is to know that statement. If you're convinced that who you are is a product and a result of your actions, or what has been done to you, or what you've done, very difficult to change that. So the first shift has to happen is in your own perception. That's not who you are. So you'll say, well, let's say I'll play devil's advocate and have a dialogue with myself, the two voices. Someone will say, well, how do you know that's not who I am? Well, first of all, if you have a bit of faith and you do accept the Torah as truth, the Torah says so. Let's start with that. The Torah says you were created in a divine image. Okay, but then the person will say, well, maybe I don't have faith. I lost my faith. Or I've been disappointed by Judaism and by the institutions and by the corrupt bureaucracies. Okay, so welcome to the club, I would say. And the question is that how you're going to define the rest of your life? Because those around you have been corrupt, so now you've also you won't become corrupt, but you'll become so cynical and jaded that you don't want to accept anything. So you're really giving up on yourself. You know, my only real response ultimately is there's no proving. I cannot prove to any of you here that you are walking love, that you are entities called love. The only thing one can do is called experiential proof. Does it resonate? How do you like to look at yourself? Do you want to look at yourself as a sufferer, that your identity has been shaped by what has happened to you in your life? Or do you want to maintain and realize that maybe you do have the inner child and the soul remains intact? As we say every morning, the shamash and the satabi, the soul you have given me, instilled in me, is pure. Do you like to believe that there's a purity that remains within you? Now, some of us have been so hurt in life that we have difficulty believing that any longer. All I can say as a friend would be, maybe don't give up on yourself. Even if you think it's 99% that it's not there any longer, what happens if you're wrong? What 1% happens to be you're wrong? The consequences are pretty dire. That if you really do have that love within you, and you've given up on yourself, then you have essentially one day come to realize that you could have, there was hope and you didn't grab it. That's not a very pleasant feeling. Whereas the other way around would be, the worst scenario is, do believe in yourself and try and see. At the end of the day, it seems like, using Pascal's wager, that, like he says, I'd rather find out that there was no God and have lived a life like there was one, than to not live a life that there was God and find out there was one. So that's basically, if you're a gambler, that would be good to just weigh. But I don't even believe really in that argument, because I don't think it's about, a card game or something like that. But on a more personal level, the fact of the matter is, I like to believe, that all of us like to believe, that we are purer than we think we are. And just because life has done some things to us, and some of us may experience pretty harsh things, and I've seen a lot of darkness in my life. Thank God, not my personal life, but I've seen people have shared with me. But darkness is not what shapes you. And if you allow that to shape you, that is your responsibility. So you can live in darkness, but doesn't mean you have to become a dark soul. The Torah's perspective is the other way around. No matter what darkness happens, you remain a body of light. And interesting, light and love don't just begin with an L, and not just both four-letter words. No, light is actually 5, right? But they also, in Hebrew, the first, love and light are considered to be one, because the 6 days, 7 days of the week, when the Torah enumerates the 6 days and then Shabbos, so it's also the 7 emotions. Yom Echad, the first day, when the Vayhi Ar, there shall be light. That's the day of Chesed. The Tsar says Chesed is light. Why is Chesed light? Because love brings light into the world. Hate brings darkness into the world. Love is a force that is emancipating. It's freeing. It unblocks things. And think for a moment, when you allow love into your life, when you have love in your life, what does it do? It lightens your spirit. Actually, also the word light. I didn't think of it that way. It lifts your spirit, another L. It frees you. You feel everything is possible. Now, of course, love can also bring the other side, where you can get hurt. But that again comes down to is what is the noun and what is the verb. So Judaism's approach is that the verbs can be positive ones, they can be negative ones. But the noun, who you are, your identity, is always a body of light. It's always a walking lamplighter. You're a walking flame. You're a walking piece of love, as I said, a walking entity called Chesed. That is your essence. And everything else is commentary. Everything else are experiences. And the question is, are you going to allow that inner identity express itself in this world? Or God forbid, you'll allow the experiences of your life to extinguish, or to conceal at least, and obscure the love that you have to give. So in a way, it's almost like, I think of it from a pride point of view. I meet people and they give me their arguments of how dark things are, and they don't even understand how I could be optimistic and positive and loving. How could you love when you see such cruelty? And they're right, there is cruelty. But the question is, what does it do to you? If it shapes you, then that means that you are basically a victim of what shapes you. And if you happen to experience good things in your life, and that has shaped you, that is also not necessarily means it coming from within you. It means you're basically a leaf in the wind, and whatever the winds will do, that's how you will be defined. Instead of your identity defining your reactions, it's your reactions that define your identity, which of course is not exactly something anyone should want to be in that type of position. So I tell you all this evening that you have a choice. And if you haven't heard it before, now you hear it for the first time. So now, no more excuses. You have a choice. You have a choice, not whether everything is going to work out in life. Things are sometimes going to be very challenging. You have a choice what is going to be your attitude and who you ultimately see yourself as. And I know for some it's extremely difficult. When you grow up in a very dark in a very corrupt, a very abusive environment, especially at a young age, it's not easy to see light. Very difficult to see it. Because it's one thing, as an adult, we're more resilient, we have more protection. A young defenseless child sees darkness, it's very difficult for them to see a good side to themselves. But it doesn't mean it's impossible. It doesn't mean it's impossible, because the fact is the soul, like the heart, continues to beat, and we have that capacity to reach into that inner place. And when you do, you discover, like a flame, like a furnace. The furnace is what feeds the flames. And that each of us has that type of fire and passion in the soul, which is called love, that has the power to have enormous impact on other people around us. So one of the litmus tests that I've often suggested is like, it sounds simple, but it's not so simple. It's like you ask people, or people that you know, think of those people that when you meet them, you're around them, you feel illuminated, you feel love, you feel hope. And then there are people you meet that when you're around them, you always feel hopeless, you feel lost, you feel like nothing's possible. And then the biggest question, even more importantly, is how about you? How do you make people feel that have come in your proximity? Are you a person that drains others or that empowers others? Now, I don't know if it's a black and white, always one way or the other. It could be sometimes like this, sometimes like that. Now, it's not an easy thing to find out, because who's going to tell you? You're going to go over to some of the people you know and say, tell me, do I drain you or do I empower you? I mean, I'm sure you'll find some people that will be blunt and tell you, but that may be for other reasons, not because they're trying to be truthful, because they want to, whatever. Maybe some people, misery loves company. If people who drain others feel that everybody's draining others, it makes them feel, I guess, a little less culpable. But there are ways to do this. It comes down to, do people call upon you for advice? People call upon you when they're in trouble. Will they reach to you for help, for advice? Or no one ever calls you that way, because they know that you're the one that's always needy and you're never able to give anybody any hope. Now, I'm not suggesting anyone in this room is that way, but let's be honest. We live in a world that there are many people who are, when you're drowning, and even a good swimmer goes out to save you, often a person drowning who's desperate is going to pull down the person who's the good swimmer. And that's the power of darkness. So what I want to say is that in this month of Elul, we have the power to maybe shift some things, and to begin anew, and to recognize and believe in yourself and your possibilities. And it doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter how bad your experiences were. The bottom line is this, and to me this is the ultimate message of the Torah. And without this message, I don't know if any other message is that relevant, is that you are essentially love. You are essentially worthy of love, ability to love others, and worthy to be loved. That is the essence of a soul. No different than when you were the first day you came out of your mother's womb. The only thing that changed is your perception and your experiences that have so-called wandered away from that first moment. So maybe our mission is to retrace the steps to that child that was born that morning. And maybe that is what Rosh Hashanah is after all. It's the birthday of the world. It's the birthday of the human race. Adam and Eve were born on Rosh Hashanah, which means it's the birthday of each one of us. So in a way, it's a day that allows us to go back to the beginning. Maybe that's what the work is about, to retrace, to reconnect to that moment before the snow, but when the freshly fallen snow fell to the ground, when we were that pure, loving person. As I said, every child, a healthy person, is always expresses affection to a child. It's a natural thing, because children just have that type of beauty and innocence and purity to them. So maybe this is an opportunity in the month of Elul to reconnect to that person. And maybe you can become a radiating body of love that whoever sees you, whoever comes in proximity with you, feels better about themselves. That would be pretty nice, right? That would be a nice compliment. That someone says, when you're around, I feel confident, I feel strong, I feel everything is possible. So I wish that upon each of us here, to be able to have that type of presence, that those around us would say, you're a person I want to be around. That the story where the parachuter, the guy was training to be a parachuter. So, with the training process, they take you up on the plane, and you watch others who jump, and until after a while, you're asked, after like a month or two of training, comes your turn, they pack you up. So they pack up this guy, and he's all excited, he's watching how the others jump, he's learning the techniques, the methods and stuff like that. He comes right to his turn, he looks down, he sees, they're like 30,000 up above, and he freaks out, he runs away, he says, no, I can't jump. Okay, so they're expect, these lessons they expect certain people just the first time around they can't do it. Another month of training and building confidence. A month passes, your turn, okay, same thing happens. He just can't bring himself to jump. So the commander says, listen, young man, clearly you're never going to be a parachutist. I think you should sign up to another department of the armed forces, and you'll serve your country in some other way. No, but the guy insists, I want to really be here. I love it here. He says, but you're never going to jump. He says, it's true, I may never jump, but I like to be around people who jump. It makes me feel good. So there are people who don't have the courage to jump, but they like to be around people who jump. So I'm suggesting that we should not be in that place. When I say jumping here, I'm not talking about parachuting and taking such type of risks, or that everybody's got their. What I'm talking about taking the jump is having the confidence. So maybe as we enter into Rosh Hashanah, think of it this way: you have a new opening. That really, maybe it's a day where you can set your mind and say, I'm going to think different, and I'm going to speak different, and I'm going to act differently. And you have a day that opens up those doors. So even if you're a cynic, and even if you're a skeptic, just that 1% chance, maybe. You never know. Maybe you will have a new opening, a new beginning. And you could be a person, as I said, that everyone around you feels, this is a person that I'd like to be like. This is a person that radiates love, that gives love, that knows how to receive love. And trust me, you come into a place like that, blessings will come your way. Because you will attract blessings. Quality attracts quality. People are miserable, even if they don't speak about it, even if they don't necessarily show it. Misery attracts misery, and beauty attracts beauty. When you think of yourself as a person that is love, you'll attract love in your life. And the other option is we can blame everybody else for all our problems and say, I don't love because I've been betrayed, I've been hurt, there's no one to trust. But I will say to you is that if a few of us just assume this approach, you'll find blessings that will be attracted. Like a magnet, you'll attract quality around you. So my blessing to everyone here in this month of Elul, use this time well. It's a powerful month. Ani l'daidi v'daidi li. I am to my beloved is to me. It's like a reflection. The interesting statement in the Mishle is, Kamayim aponim leponim. Like a face is reflected in water, one heart is reflected in another. The interesting thing about that is, a face has no choice but to be reflected in water. It's like there's no option. So a heart that's open will ultimately be reflected in another heart. Words from the heart enter the heart. So with that being said, I want to wish and dedicate this class to Lauren, our good friend, Lauren Finkelstein. Happy birthday. Are there any other dedications that I should mention? Tomorrow night, Philip will be giving his class at 7 p.m. And I'm going through my prerequisite announcements. We also have the email that I send out every week, so if you haven't signed up, just give us your email. We could also stay in contact. As you see, as we wander from the classes and give updates of where we are, etc., online, offline, etc. So if we have your email, we can do that easily. And finally, you have books of 60 days here? Oh, so I can't even announce that. So the announcement that I'm not going to make is that there's a book called 60 Days. You can go online and get it there, or call the office. Velvel here, right here, the cute guy sitting across from me. They can't see you online, Velvel. You'll have to. Okay, next time. We'll be happy to help anyone. And if anybody needs assistance over the high holidays, where to pray, how to pray, and stuff like that, please call upon us. We're here for you. The class will resume hopefully next week back 19th Street. And I think next week, and then the following is Rosh Hashanah already. Oh, so next week will be a pre-Rosh Hashanah workshop. I believe it's titled. It's online. I forgot what it's titled, but it will be a pre-Rosh Hashanah workshop. And because the holidays this year are most of them Wednesday nights, I mean there will be the week after will be a class because it's between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot and some Torah. But I'll announce it all. But Wednesday nights, I think, are mostly holidays in the next few weeks. So next week, yes. The following, no. The following after that, yes. And I also want to announce, would be to honor myself, my father personally, October 3rd, we're having an annual lecture, the 6th annual memorial lecture for my father. It's at Park East Synagogue. And the speaker will be Senator Joseph Lieberman. It's a free event, but you need to RSVP because there'll probably be a pretty big demand. So please RSVP at lecture@gjcf.net or call our office, or you can just to let us know one way or email us, and we will be happy to reserve a spot for you. So that's a personal invitation. That's October 3rd. It's Monday night after Rosh Hashanah.
Class title is Are You Drained?
Next week is Are You Drained? Is the class title. Yes, it's a perfect pre-Rosh Hashanah topic. So if you're drained, it's a perfect class for you. If you're not, well, you'll probably benefit as well. So everyone have a very pleasant evening. It was an honor to speak to kindred spirits and loving souls like yourselves. And now you have to go out there and conquer the world. Seize the day. Carpe diem. Good night, everyone. Thank you.